Yeah, you're over there texting as we're starting episode 40 of Vertical Pursuit. Keep texting. It's all right.
I'm looking up a Bible verse.
Oh.
Based on what we're going to be talking about.
Oh, okay.
Well, but I could be texting. Do you want me to order some food, or I can order something?
Get a little DoorDash. I'll bet I know where you're looking. Can I predict?
Do it.
Are you looking in John 8?
Maybe.
All right. Welcome in, Mike Barrett, Mike Tatlock. We discuss current events quite a bit on this podcast because it usually relates to an overarching theme or topic that we want to talk about. And everything seems to always fit together pretty well, sometimes unfortunately, with where we go on this podcast. And there's crazy stuff going on. We were just talking before we pushed record about just what's going to happen and what's coming. And I think a few episodes ago, we talked about this. We talked about truth and how it's hard to find the truth anymore and how that's kind of by design. And I want to I didn't know we were going to kind of bring in truth, but I also want to bring in one thing that seems like right now is so under attack as threatened governments and or elected officials get threatened. They then respond with fear on the citizens, which then results in the citizens agreeing to relinquish freedom or some freedoms because they think they have to in order to be protected by whatever it is. Now, I was having this discussion we had another episode on this earlier. I had this discussion with somebody last night on another topic that's making the rounds again, coming back, is the whole UFO thing, the UAP thing, which is starting again. And I was kind of reading and listening because it's coming back into play where they want, and they're convinced that the government's well aware of this, and they need to tell the truth. And somebody made the comment, well, why haven't they been truthful, and why doesn't the public know everything? And the old comment, and the old cliched comment always is, well, it would scare the population too much. And I'm thinking the whole time, but that's what they do. That's what gives them power.
Exactly.
Look at COVID. Look at so many things that have happened recently. Fear is what gives them control and power. And I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just saying, as it relates to a topic like freedom, which is I wanted to talk about from a biblical standpoint, but first we're going to go worldly to kind of explain the two ways in this and how they are very, very similar. So, and then you're looking at what happened recently in Ireland, and they had an attack, and their citizens are fed up, and they don't want people coming into that country who are going to commit crime. They start to see where other countries drifted and allowed people to come in who wish them ill will. And so the response by some of the government then is to take away freedoms and to censor, which again, that is a big way to take away freedoms. And so it's so funny in the West how now, and I'll get around to the biblical part of this, but it's so funny how it seems like there is this push right now to get at the heart of freedom. And if you are a person who is, and obviously on this podcast, we spend a lot of time talking about Christian topics, or at least a faith answer to many of the topics that face you on a worldly basis. Freedom should be paramount in your mind in terms of the things that you cherish, not only about the country, but about your freedom to practice your faith. And in so many countries, as we have discussed, that is not a freedom. And we have heard stories from missionaries who have smuggled Bibles into China or into other, these people who've done this. Yeah. And it's so crazy to think about that. But then when you think about freedoms, and you can see where that where those dominoes could start to fall. Even, I mean, and the people in Ireland are not having it, but there have been people who've been talking this week about, well, then if you don't believe this, we're just going to censor you. We're going to take away your, again, social media, which has kind of been a hot topic in this country as well. And that's where the whole censorship thing starts, which spirals into stealing your freedom.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the transition I want to start with in terms of, you see a lot of topics in the world and they make you nervous, but as a Christian and as somebody who holds faith dear to your heart, that freedom part, and if you take seriously the Great Commission of making disciples, you need freedom to do that.
Yeah.
And that's where we live in the best country on the face of the earth. I'm not sure, especially with our younger generation, if they truly value freedom and what it truly means from a faith standpoint and just from a worldly standpoint as a citizen. How's that for a convoluted, wild setup that went in 10 different directions?
I like how you said the kind of the worldly cultural idea of freedom and then like the biblical idea. I love how you put those together.
And we'll get into that more in a minute. Because I know you looked something up and I have something too.
Yeah, when we'll get to the spiritual stuff. But here's the thing too, and I think that there is a level of there's two ways of looking at this. There's kind of the deeper spiritual. The Bible talks a lot about freedom, and it might shock some of you when we get there. When you hear the Bible talk about freedom, what does that mean? In terms of freedom spiritually, freedom relationally, and all those sort. We'll get to that. But I think when you talk about freedom, the way that we think of freedom in a country like the United States, where when I've traveled to other countries, and this is what happens when people are ignorant. You travel to other countries where they don't have freedoms, where there's complete. I mean, you look at whatever form of government is, whether it's communism or some sort of dictator type regime that's in place. You go to some continents like Africa, and you see healthy countries, but you see some countries that are ran by warlords. And you go, do you want to be under that? Do you want to be under that kind of thing? You go to communistic countries where they're completely watching everything you do, under scrutiny, and it creates a culture of fear and suspicion because the government knows that if they can't have their eye on you, they will have someone do it for them.
Yeah, because they might know, you might learn the truth.
Exactly. Exactly. So you like take China, for instance. This is real. So this is very real. China has the social credit system. I was in Barnes and Noble about 3 years ago. That was before COVID. It was about 4 years ago. I'm in Barnes and Noble, and I'm in the religious section, and I'm looking to buy a Bible. And I noticed this like 20-some-year-old Asian woman is standing next to me, and she's looking, and we're kind of looking at Bibles, and I'm not bothering her, and I'm looking, and I grab a Bible off the shelf, and then she looks at me and says, "I've never bought a Bible before. Can you help me buy one?" And I said,
"You always end up in these situations."
I do, and I love them. I'm like, I would love to have these every day. I said, "Absolutely." I said, and I was trying to figure out, and so she had just moved here from China. She was a student at a university here in the Portland area, and she was taking a world religions class. And part of her assignment was she had to study another religion other than what she grew up with. And so she picked Christianity, and so she went to Barnes & Noble to buy a Bible, but didn't know what to look for, and which makes sense. So I said, and I was explaining, here's an easy one to read, and she was asking these questions, are they all the same? Because, like, translations. And so we're talking through that, and just had this great conversation. I said, our church would love, we do this at our church. We give Bibles away. I said, our church would love to buy you a Bible. Can I buy you one on behalf of our church? And got a nice one for her. And then she asked all these questions. And here's where I'm going with this. I said, what's your story? Like, I'm just curious. Like, here you are. And she goes, I'm intrigued by Christianity. I'm intrigued here by what I've seen in the West. And I said, that's fascinating. I go, why are you intrigued? What are you seeing? Because obviously it's not something you've seen before. She goes, well, I just compare it to what I've had to grow up with in China. I said, what was that like? And she told me what it was like living under the social credit system. And she told me, you guys I don't know if you know how good you have it here. The freedom you have. She's the freedom I can walk in here and buy a Bible. And she talked about how the social credit system worked and how it actually turns people to be watchers, because you get more points if you turn somebody in, or
people rat on their own family.
They do. And it creates a suspicion, and everybody's watching, like, who's going to rat me out? Fear. That's very real. And anyways, so I'm hearing this story from her, and you can read it on your own and research it. It's the way it is. And so there are governments that want to control, and they don't want you to have freedom. And, we say our country's birthed on freedom. It was. We were a separatists that we tried to escape from the monarchy. That, just study your history. And what do they say about those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it? And I do get concerned about any generation that doesn't know their history. And you're, especially in our nation, we have so many socialists in power within our education systems and universities. I heard from a colleague the other day, someone from China, and they're here, and they said, oh my goodness, you guys, they were under some really hard dictators. People don't know in China, different rulers, even in the last 50 years, some of the highest death tolls on humanity and civil rights against people was by some regimes in China. The complete genocide of people. And this colleague was saying he has a individual from China that was saying, you guys, I see all over the U.S. what we tried to leave from in China. Where you guys are going is where I'm running from. And there's a generation, every generation, my generation, your generation, our generation. Like if we don't know our history, and we're doomed to repeat it. And there are people to this day that go, the Holocaust, that never happened. And you're like, and you go, oh my gosh, and so. And there are those who are rewriting history, and so there's that.
Yes.
And so all that to say is, the Bible, we just talked about this in church the other day. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And I think that there's a lot of evil in our world that is a deep motivation of corruption and greed, which manifests in controlling people, and creating crises that then you become the savior, and you're saving them is for your profit. So this is all tied together. At the end of the day, there are those who are anti-freedom and want to impose whatever so they can control people. That's just a very real reality in our world.
And I think that, yes, along those lines, and you mentioned this when you started that story, the fact that a lot of people, especially young people now, don't know what freedom really means when you don't know the truth. And so truth and freedom, I mean, this is not profound. This is obvious. Truth and freedom are so closely linked.
Yeah.
And this is where I think when you talked about the girl from China, when you don't know the truth, you settle for the lie. And the freedom, not having freedom, sends you into that spiral. And I think there's a couple of lies about freedom, and I think a lot of this is, I know you agree, a lot of this is demonic.
Yeah.
So in terms of I think a lot of the battles are spiritual. I just do. I mean, I've come to that conclusion. Oh, yeah. And we've talked a little about that, but I do feel like a lot of them are spiritual. So you believe a couple of things. I think when the truth is hidden from you, you end up believing that, number one, law is the way. So that's where you see people almost accepting this. And I see even a certain faction of people in this country who long for that. We saw that during COVID.
Right.
And you believe the lie that it all depends on you. And this is, I think, why religion and Christianity is such a threat to those countries. So you try to find freedom and life through your own perfection and performance.
Right.
So then you're always disappointed because you always fall short. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then the other one I think is, and this is going to be harder for me to explain what's rattling around in my pea brain on this, but law is one way, sin is the other way when you don't have the truth. So you believe the lie that freedom is found in autonomy over your own life. And I know you've done sermons on this. So you don't want to submit to God's plan, which is the ultimate truth, speaking of truth.
Right.
So you attempt to find freedom in your own truth, your way. You're the answer. You be you, dog, which we always talk about. And it just leads to sin and death.
Totally.
Quite frankly,
Yeah.
and quite simply. And I know I'm going a bunch of different areas here, but that's where I think the relationship between, and I want the youth to understand, when freedom gets kicked around or it becomes a cliche, that is truth. That is the vehicle that lets you find truth. And there are so many ways that I think you can drift into or be led into those lies I just talked about. The law being the lie, sin being the lie, and things that you think can gain that control back.
Totally.
Have I totally confused everybody?
No, I'm tracking with you.
Okay.
Because like at the end of the day, you have outside, when you talk about governments and such, that's an external, right? That's an external way of imposing on my life. And we talk about extremes like that and different political systems that take advantage of their populace and people. And of course, we all know, yes, you can take freedom, personal freedom, to an unhealthy, that's what you're saying, to an unhealthy extreme where you have no rule of order and you have total anarchy because nobody is like, there should be no laws because
it comes with
to do it.
Freedom comes with responsibility.
Totally, exactly. So we're not talking about living in complete, but at the same time, we have laws of the land and so forth. But I think there is a healthy way to walk in freedom, and then an unhealthy way to walk in freedom, and it's getting confused. So, true freedom is not I get to define what is true,
correct,
and do whatever I want. That is also what is being orchestrated and materialized and emphasized in our society is you define truth, because when Jesus said you find the truth and truth will set you free, but if you define freedom based on your truth, imagine a world where everybody's living out their own truth, and whatever that means by freedom, the world is in a state of complete upheaval. And so you have to have order, right? Well, then to some, is order threatening? Is order a threat to my freedom? I should be able to do whatever I want. So there's that whole idea. But what I love is when the Bible talks about freedom, it talks about this level of spiritual freedom, that when Jesus said the truth will set you free, Jesus defined himself as the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's the contrast. Our world says you're the truth, and that will set you free. No, you living your truth out leads to more enslavement. You're a slave to your sin.
Yes.
You're enslaved to whatever you define as right or wrong. Doesn't lead to freedom. When Jesus is the truth, he leads us to freedom. Freedom from addiction, freedom from self-hate, freedom from the things that we are viced into, whatever it might be. Jesus liberates us, gives us freedom, and he frees us from religion, frees us from the obligation of the law, frees us from trying to earn the weight of having to earn our approval for him. He's like, you're free from that kind of stuff. And it's the truth. He's the truth. Sets you, so spiritual liberation, spiritual freedom, emancipated from religion, emancipated from my own self-harm and self-addiction nature and my own self-truth. Yeah. He just liberates us. That's what the freedom of spiritual freedom he talks about.
And that's when so I was talking a minute ago about people understanding what freedom really means. And that's where it comes into the spiritual context of the whole thing, in that your freedom, as you said, comes from Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a healthy way to look at it. It doesn't come from resisting sin or being a good person. And likewise, it doesn't come from, as you said a moment ago, satisfying all of your earthly and sinful desires.
Right.
Your freedom comes from Jesus, but that also comes with a responsibility and an accountability.
Yes.
Which I think is, my dad said this when I was young. He talked about, and my dad taught government as a teacher in high school, and he taught classes called the Bill of Rights, and all back when they actually taught this stuff. And you could actually, I mean, not that they don't now, just not to the extreme. They had electives, like he had a class literally just called the Bill of Rights in high school, which was awesome. And you could teach this kind of thing, but he talked to me one time about how he felt, and we didn't have deep spiritual talks, my dad and I, but we discussed one time about government, and he goes, well, I don't think man is suited to govern itself. I think it needs to be governed by the Lord. And I went, wow. And I remember him saying that. And we didn't really he didn't really expand on that, and we never circled back to it, but I still remember it.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree. And at the time, I was not mature enough to understand what that meant. But now it's funny that would pop into my head now as we're discussing what I'm trying to say true freedom really is. Also what true governance really is, and who is appropriate, suited, and deserving of being that governing body to us. Yeah. And I'm not trying to say we shouldn't respect our own government. I'm not that crazy. There are podcasts for you if you think that. I mean, this isn't one of them. I know that you can spiral off into that, and as we talked about in a recent podcast, you can certainly drift into that, and I know people who have, and they make for really entertaining conversations. Yeah. I'm not ready to go there, but I do think as a Christian, and some things we talk about a lot on this podcast as it relates to men in Christianity, women as well, but I think the idea, I am comfortable with the idea, and obviously I am, that my freedom comes from Jesus.
That's right.
Period.
Yep. Totally. And he frees us from the obligation to earn favor with him. And that was a strict adherence, 100% perfection to the Old Testament law, and that no one could ever measure up to. Jesus is the only one. And that's why he said through him, there's freedom. And again, you can be liberated from that you don't have the weight and burden of religion that you have to somehow earn to find your spiritual freedom. Because when you ask the question, if I want freedom, it implies that I am not in freedom to something. I'm being bound by something. You know, we talk about freedom, there's government freedom, and, like all of our rights that we want to do things. And some countries have better ways of that. But then you also talk about the freedom from things that hold us into captivity.
Yeah.
You talk about someone that's being free. It's like an animal that's freed from a snare. So what are the things that snare us, enslave us? And it's my own sin. It's my own, Bible calls it flesh, my own internal wiring towards things that aren't good for me and good for others. And so many of us are held into, the Bible uses strongholds. That's in a negative way. It's like you're a slave to something. You're held captive to something. And Jesus is like, I'm going to set you free from that. And when you're set free, I always love to say this because I heard this years ago. You're not just set free from something. You're set free to something. And I love the idea of like an animal that's in a snare, and when the animal's let loose, it's freed from something. It's true. It's no longer in the snare. But then you watch that animal run to a brook to drink water that was just outside its reach because they were snared. Mm-hmm. It's now not just set free, it's free too. And I think that's where Jesus is like, I have a life for you, and there's no way you're ever going to get there except through me. And you can try, but you're not. You are enslaved to sin, this world, yourself, and I have so much more for you. And then he adds this one. Now, this is where it gets relationally tough. He says you're free, but don't use your freedom in a way that hinders other people. So even as I live out
that's where the responsibility comes in.
Exactly. It's the responsibility. I can walk through life and go, hey, I'm free. Jesus set me free. I get to do whatever I want. And you're like, no, you don't.
I get to go into 7-Eleven and steal everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, no, you don't. You don't get away with it.
You can in California. That's a whole nother topic.
I was just gonna say. That's a next podcast that's coming up. But
sorry,
I love that.
I knocked you offline there. Sorry.
No, that's good. I just think I can walk around and use freedom as an excuse to impose myself on other people, or be inconsiderate. But it's the idea of, here's a perfect example. My son just had his 21st birthday, and every birthday he does, we do kind of a rite of passage and talk about what does it mean to be a man of faith, and share some just real stories of life. And anyway, so 21 is drinking age legally, and so we were just sitting out and having some time together, and I just shared with him and said, hey, at 21 you are legally free now, legally to do that. And there's going to come times in your life when you have every right to do something, and not just drinking. That's just a metaphor, but you have every right to do it. Like, you are free to do these things, but you have to ask the question, but should I? Mm-hmm. And who will this impact, me and others? And so the whole conversation was about responsibility. And he's the most responsible, man that I know at his age. But I was just reminiscing with him of lessons I've learned hard way. And, I can do whatever I want and say I'm free to do it. But then does my freedom impose something on somebody's life that I'm going to now place myself not into slavery? I'm choosing to deny myself of something that I'm free to do because I'm choosing a higher standard of life, which is, how can I be better for somebody else? Or how can I, and so like the drinking thing, we have friends that are alcoholics, and I will never have a drink when I'm in their presence. Absolutely. Could I? Of course, I'm free to do it. Free to do whatever I want to do.
Right.
But if my freedom causes someone, and this is what the Bible says, if my freedom, which you're free to do, causes someone to stumble, then consider that person over yourself, and don't use your freedom as a selfish gain of things. So it's the thinking of freedom with responsibility to myself and others.
The rite of passage thing is so cool, and not to get off on a sidebar here, but you put that in my mind when my son turned 18 last June. And so we did a little ceremony for him. I might have even talked about it on a podcast. I don't remember. It maybe last year we did, but got him a sword.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I remember that. Had it engraved.
Sit out there with the fire. I remember that.
We had a big fire going, and I had some guys that were
cool, close
in his life. A lot of them authority figures, or at least influential figures in his life. You were there. I would have never done that had you not brought up. And I've told people about that. They're like, what did you do? Rite of passage. So, yeah, he turned 18. And so you just talked about you had one at 21, these milestone birthdays, which in our society means something that age. But it was a very cool idea you had. And I think he still tells people about that. He's got the sword in his room. And it's just kind of this, what would it be called? Not really like a, what is this kind of sword he has called? It's not like a knight sword, kind of like that. Anyway, just to be honest with you, I got it on Amazon. It didn't matter, but got the sword, presented him the sword. You anointed him with oil. Hey, each guy told a few things. It was half an hour, but he still talks about how cool that was to point out each stage in life. And then your communication with your son, that is awesome that you do that. And then sit and talk with him about what that milestone and that rite of passage truly means. That's cool. I had a great dad, but we never did that. Yeah. But that is a cool thing.
I think that's, I had a great dad too. And we talked a lot. We did everything together. So gosh, he spent every day inviting me to go do something with him. And it was awesome. We did everything. And we talked all about the Bible. It was amazing. He knew everything. But I never had those kind of talks either. And I know some of that's generationally. I understand that different generations, men communicate, express themselves differently. I get that. But I think that guys like you and me, it's a kind of a little off topic, but in a sense, it is on topic. Like where, your generation, my generation, versus guys older than us. You know, you and me grew up in a home where maybe dads didn't express, "Hey, I love you." Maybe they did, but that was the exception. They didn't show a lot of affection or emotion. Some did. My dad hugged me all the time, but my point is that now it's like, bro hug, love you, man. We do this stuff all the time.
Oh yeah.
That is more normative. And I see that now even in my son's life, like where that's even now more normal for guys his age to be very okay to express it. I think is really awesome. So it's that idea again of like freedom is, how do I use my freedom to make this about even somebody else? Where a lot of times freedom's about me. I want my freedom, and which is great, but how can I take my freedom but make it really about somebody else? That's the theme you see throughout the Bible, especially with Jesus, is like, yes, you're free, but you're free to serve others. You're free now to make a difference for somebody else's life, express that for somebody.
And to go back to the beginning, kind of what we talked about, the theme in our first few moments, I love how it equates, again, the truth with freedom. And I mentioned you were looking for, a lot of times we don't do it very often on this podcast, but once in a while I'll mention a piece of scripture. I want to, if it's okay, I mentioned the discussion of freedom as it related to John 8. And a lot of times I'll read one verse or something we all know, but it's out of context. So I'm going to read a couple things that back and are related to what we're talking about. And I want you to kind of then unpack that and this is one of those cool times in the Bible where I love that Jesus gets frustrated and almost a little ticked off, and because they're not getting him. And I love that
totally
fully man part.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Because a lot of people, I think these are the kind of books or these kind of areas in the Bible I'd like to lead people when they want to know what Jesus was like, because it shows his humanity along with him obviously being fully God.
Absolutely.
So the quote that I think, the scripture that you used a minute ago, "You are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That's one that's been quoted a lot. And you can, I love this because you can visualize what his disciples are. There's a battle that then happens. So they say to Jesus, "But we are descendants of Abraham. We've never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean?" Implying that we don't know what freedom is and that we will be set free. And Jesus says back to them, "I tell you the truth. Everyone who sins is a slave of sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son is part of the family forever. So if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. And yet some of you are trying to kill me because there is no room in your hearts for my message." So I'll skip down a little bit. And then they come back again. The disciples say, "Our father is Abraham," they declare. And Jesus says, for if you were really the children of Abraham, you would follow his example." Then they come back down again. And he says about imitating your real father. They reply, "We aren't illegitimate children." And there's exclamation marks. "God himself is our true father." And Jesus then gets upset and says, "Why can you not understand what I'm saying? It's because you can't even hear me," which I love that part. "For you are the children of your father, the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. So when I tell you the truth, you just naturally don't believe me," which is crazy. "Which of you can truthfully accuse me of sin? And since I'm telling you the truth, why don't you believe me?" Wow. So you can kind of sense, I think that obviously it's very appropriate in terms of what we're talking about here in truth and freedom. But I also wanted to read that in context, because I was talking a moment ago about people, especially younger people now, which is disciples who are all pretty young, not knowing what freedom really means. That's the frustration that comes from out of your father trying to explain to you what freedom truly means.
Yeah.
And we don't think of, at least I never did traditionally, of Jesus getting in a debate with his own disciples on a topic and getting angry.
Yeah.
And you can kind of sense that here where he's going, dudes, how many times do I have to say this? And you're not even listening to me. And you can sense them coming back going, well, wait a minute. So I love when I started off this episode talking about how I think some people don't know what freedom means. Well, here were some people in the presence of God and Jesus saying, we're missing it. We don't get it. And he's getting ticked trying to explain it.
Oh,
but unpack a little bit of that for me if you
that's
can.
like, and that's where you see both in disciples and the religious leaders, this animosity towards Jesus at times. Of course, the disciples were following Jesus and they were, following him and at times didn't get it. But they hung in there. And then, they always talk about the 12 disciples when there was a lot more disciples than just the 12. And there was even one point where Jesus had a multitude of disciples and there was a debate that broke out over something he said, and actually it offended them. And they didn't know what he was talking about. And the disciples, it says that Jesus could overhear them, and they were offended. And you could hear, Jesus could hear the whisperings and the muttering and under the breath, how angry they were with him. And then it says many of them just left him. They're like, we're out. We don't like what he's saying right now. And they walked away. And then Jesus in that moment looks at Peter and goes, what about you? You walking out now too? You don't like what I'm saying either? And Peter's response is the best. Peter looks at Jesus and goes, where else can I go? You have the words of life. And it was almost as if Peter's kind of agreeing a little bit with them, going, I don't get it either. I don't know if I like it either. Yeah, and I don't understand, but I know I don't get what you're saying either, but I know I'm going to consider my options. I'm going to hang in there with you, and maybe I'm just going to trust that you make the right path. And so you see those, like, that battle. And then you got the religious leaders who really were upset with Jesus, constantly at him, attacking him, accusing him. And you can see, like, even the disciples at times listening, going, where are we going to fall? Are we going to fall with the religious ones? And so where this comes from is because they had an expectation that when the Messiah was going to show up, he was going to act a certain way, speak a certain way, do certain things, and Jesus didn't fit that mold. He didn't fit that mold. He's hanging out with sinners, and they're like, wait, he can't be God. And he's a humble man, and look at him, like, come on, this can't be the Messiah. If the Messiah was really here, he'd be destroying Rome. He would show up and build his army, take his throne, and rule with an iron fist, and we're going to be behind him. And Jesus shows up, and he's a humble servant, and he didn't fit their mold, and so they accused him.
He was a threat.
He was a threat.
You talked about a minute ago, as you related it to governments and money and power and things that are a disruptor, and how that could disrupt the very way people would make their living. Yeah. And when you want to talk about the religious leaders then and the Sanhedrin and how his words and his ways they didn't like, I mean, obviously is the reason they killed him, was he was starting to influence people, and it was going to affect their power, absolutely, their position, their standing, and ultimately how they made a living.
That's such a good point, because Jesus threatened them, because even you had the religious leaders who were all about control. And they had gotten so corrupt even by the time that Jesus showed up, and they were about control. And so they had their way. And so Jesus shows up, and he kind of throws their whole control system up in the air, and that threatened their positions of power. That threatened their positions of control. And that's why they attacked him, and they came at him. And Jesus continually extended offers of grace, continually said, if you only knew who you're talking to, I'm actually here for you. Like, don't be threatened by me. You should be embracing me, because what I have to say is actually the true words that will lead to freedom, and yet you want to kill me for that. And that's why you can even take that to why there's regimes in our world right now that, it's Christmas time. So you take Herod, for instance. Herod was considered king of the Jews, but that was a political position by Rome to keep control of the people. So he had a religious king of the Jews, a religious title, but it was a political position. And then there's the announcement that the Messiah was born. And what did he do? He genocided and said, okay, all the firstborn over a certain age, slaughter them. And it says that the cries of Jerusalem were so loud.
Terrible.
Yeah, horrible, right? Why? Because the showing up of Jesus threatened him and his power and his control. And what did he do? He unleashed hell on society by taking innocent lives. And so that's what you see in regimes in our world at times. You know, there's the spiritual day-to-day walking in freedom in Jesus. The Bible says that where the Spirit of God is, there's freedom. So we're liberated. He gives us power over sin, over addiction, over anything that could be harming of ourselves. That's a beautiful freedom. That's the Christian life. The Christian life that Jesus paved for us is freedom. Because he conquered sin, he then has the power to give us to overcome sin. That's ultimate freedom. Free to, again, not from something, but free to a new life. And that message threatens people, threatens society, threatens. And so you see why so many over history, different even governments were so opposed to Christianity and how they actually created persecution and laws that would try to destroy the faith and the spread of the gospel. Is because the gospel is freedom. And that's what you see. But here's the crazy irony of how God works. Some of the most persecuted nations right now, I think of like Iran, for instance. Iran is one of the absolute most, like, talk about a regime that wants to destroy Christians. Yet revival is happening all over Iran. That doesn't make the news.
Right.
But the actual church is growing in Iran.
Wow.
Because when people are under like Islam, which is a very controlling, fear-driven regime of religion, and you got a whole government that is attached to that with a theocracy and all of that. And then all of a sudden, Christians, Muslims are becoming Christians going, I've never felt this freedom before. And it's starting to grow and spread. Well, it threatens now. And so it's a weird sort of thing that you can have both this resistance with persecution and yet this kind of under the surface movement, because freedom's contagious too.
Isn't it funny how people are still the same?
Yeah.
And when it comes to even something that could give you a better life and more freedom, if it's a disruptor to those in control, it becomes a target.
Yep.
And I remember this. I mean, this is a little off. It's not off topic, but it's going to take a quick left for a second. After my last season doing NBA games in 2016, I was trying a bunch of different things, and because I knew a lot of people, somebody came to me with an idea. It was a friend of a friend, and he had come up with a power source, which was, some people know and they've heard about, and they've been debunked to some degree, a perpetual motion machine, which if you can get a machine based on weights and magnets that can work perpetually, this one actually worked with the gravity. So it worked with the gravity of Earth, and it was as small as a water heater, and it could power a home with nothing.
Wow.
So no... It was just a generator that acted on its own. And it was a technology that was, and I didn't know this, but when talking, so I got, finally this guy was like, this friend of mine came to me and said, do we know anybody, number one, smart guys who can validate this, even though he had it validated, and then guys who could help fund the project, and they could be investors in the project. And they said, I've had a few people come to me with things like that, and I don't know that many. Anyway, I guess I knew enough people and they also wanted a website build and some things that they thought would maybe help. So I was going to go meet, he's coming to town. He didn't live in this state. And so we went to get dinner, and he was very, very strange, had to sign an NDA, and I didn't really understand all this because I wasn't in that world. And then he had a guy with him who was in the background, sat at a different booth, and he said, that's the security guy. And I said, security guy? Is this guy a real wealthy guy? He said, no, but he has stumbled upon a disruptive technology that has him in the crosshairs of the energy companies. And I said, what? I didn't know this. And so when I heard your story just now, it reminded me of that. Because for a second, I got this weird feeling crawling to the back of my neck. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what? And so then he told me the story, which now has been told before, about this guy in the 70s who developed and created an engine that ran on water. And you can look it up.
Yeah.
And there's a story. He got a car to run on water. And mysteriously, a few days later, he died with really weird circumstances, because that was, as it's told, a very disruptive technology. So when you talk about, to circle it back now to what you were just talking about, in the ways that Jesus was a very disrupting force in that world, in a world where freedom was not enjoyed.
Right.
So I think him speaking of the truth setting you free was water to those people, in terms of, you got to be kidding me. And they didn't have that freedom. But how I started this story off saying people are the same now as they were then, we're starting to almost see this stuff come full circle, where people don't understand this stuff and they're willing to give away their freedom, including what would be their right to worship.
Right. Yeah.
Which is crazy to me. And there's no point to that part of it. I don't have an answer to that. I just think it's troubling.
What's troubling is that people will forfeit their freedoms under the illusion and deception that those who want them to give their freedoms has their best interest in mind.
Right.
And, you can point to several things in different countries where whoever's in charge will say, this is for your own good. This is for your own good. And then there'll be people who are blind and go, oh my goodness, I'll line up and I will give every freedom away, thinking that maybe they will be temporarily, suspended, but then later they'll get them, and which they never do, because that wasn't the plan the whole time.
It's the power of fear.
It was, it's just like, no, we're actually not going to give these back to you. And I think that's a whole nother, conversation we could dive into, because I know we've been kind of all over this idea of freedom, but
Yeah.
but I mean, I remember like Dietrich Bonhoeffer during World War II. What people didn't realize was that as the Nazi power and Hitler was increasing, there were those who saw the trajectory of that, and during that time, the church, and by church, the church in Germany had a lot of power and influence, and the church could have prevented some of the things that Hitler was proposing. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you can read all about this, who was a Christian, a theologian, a pastor, tried to get churches to speak out against where this was going, because many could see, like, if this guy rises in power, this is going to not be good for the world. And churches, of course, didn't say anything. Churches didn't speak out. And so forth, and then it got to the point where obviously we know history, but there was actually one of the saddest things is that when the trains would haul people to the concentration camps, once they knew, because at first they were deceived, but once they knew the train, the cattle cars using humans, was taking them, the screams and the loud voices were coming from those trains. And it says that historically, you can read this, churches would try to meet on Sunday mornings, and the trains would come by with the screams of the people.
Oh.
And so what they said is, we'll just sing a little louder.
Wow.
We'll just sing in our churches a little louder. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, again, so I only say that is because there is, in the same way, here's the parallel, in the same way that we know how destructive governments and dictatorships that want to erode people's freedom and hold them into slavery, hold them into captivity, sin is as diabolic on an individual level. Sin is a dictator inside of us. And the freedom that Jesus says is the only thing that can liberate us even from ourselves and liberate us from sin. And so that's why it's so powerful when you contrast something like a government and how destructive that can be to true freedom. And we said this before, you take inmates who are in prison because of crimes they've committed, they come to find Jesus, they're more free in prison than some of us on the outside, because because we still haven't learned to walk in the freedom that Jesus gives us. You know, if somebody's enslaved to money, you're enslaved to having to earn your approval of people. You're enslaved to climbing the corporate ladder because you think somehow if I have all the trophies of the world, my life will matter. Well, you're enslaved to those things. But if I find my identity in Jesus, I don't need to climb any ladders. And I'm not enslaved to that way of thinking. I'm free to go. He loves me. I don't have to earn anything with him. I can be secure. That's a different type of freedom that he liberates us to.
That's a deep topic, but I'll end it with a line I used earlier, and this goes back to something you said a couple of minutes ago. When you don't know the truth, you settle for the lie.
That's it. That's a exclamation point on this whole conversation. Interesting discussion on freedom, and we appreciate you hanging in there with us. And this one kind of went all over the joint, but that's all right. They do that sometimes. But thanks for catching us on, I don't know where you get us, Spotify, iTunes, on the Vertical Pursuit app. Also, if you want to hear any of Pastor Tatlock's sermons, they are on gracechapel.org. Your sermon last Sunday was awesome, by the way. And we look forward to many more. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Vertical Pursuit. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast, comment, or message us, and check out our website at verticalpursuit.org. Download the VP app and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.